In this world filled with mystery and magic, the protagonist Epsilon loses control in a fierce duel, shocking everyone and straining her relationship with her mentor, Zion, to an unprecedented degree. As the story unfolds, how will Epsilon face the consequences of her actions, and where will her relationship with Zion go from here? Explore the unknown. Subscribe to Kyra's Adventure. Chapter 23. A tentative knock sounded at the infirmary's door. I was almost sure the ward was void of life with the exception of me, though I couldn't be sure with the white screens blocking my vision at either side. Osriel had left hours ago now, and Dr. Herschel had yet to return. "Come in," I called, voice laced with uncertainty. I was the last person to have authority here. Just then, the door creaked open, and suspense crawled to my throat as I strained to see who it was. My heart dropped when I spied a crimson pelter hanging just above the floor, its golden embroidery gleaming in the light. Zion rounded around the screen. I wasn't sure what to think, say, or do. And it seemed he didn't, either, for we stared at each other for what felt like an eternity. His green eyes were hard, regarding me as one would a bug under a microscope assessing me. Even so, I could see something else in those emerald eyes, something close to regret. "I came here to apologize." I stared. Of all the things to come out that harsh mouth, that was one of the last. I looked at him again. His features were a bit softer than usual, sharp-cut brows scrunched slightly, as a troubled look passed his face. Silence ensued again, and I scrambled for something to say. I'm sorry, too." "No, don't you apologize," he cut in, waving me off. My mouth fell shut, and I watched as he swaggered towards the chair at the end of my bed and sat down. Clearing his throat, he leveled his gaze. After my talk with Lord Osriel, and some self-reflection of my own, his eyes darkened. I was reminded again of my earlier thoughts of what Osriel May had said to him, and I have come to the conclusion that I have wronged you, Epsilon. And for that, I'm sorry. I swallowed, nodding. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to say, so I was thankful when he started up again. "I shouldn't have used my agetto on you," he continued. "And I was wrong to say I'd throw you out the pack. For those two I owe an apology." I nodded again. A few more moments of tense silence passed. Zion cleared his throat. "Osriel has informed me that my methods are a bit harsh, but what I need both you and him to understand is that my methods are appropriate. It are those methods that have raised great theaters that have fought and died in many wars and skirmishes. He asked me to change my methods up, at least for you, but I told him such a thing is not possible. Without my proper training, you will not become the wolf we want you to be. So, after much discussion, we made a compromise." He leveled his gaze with mine. Panic clawed to my throat, and for a fleeting moment, I found myself dreading his next words. "Epsilon, I will not train you until you can master the turning. Lord Osriel will help you instead. Until then, we will be mere strangers." I started. But I did turn, I stammered, knowing I shouldn't speak, but unable to help myself anyways. "In the woods, when I saved the Omegas. I turned into a werewolf." Zion cut me off with a sigh and a shake of the head. "Do not be mistaken, Epsilon, you turned because you used emotional magic, not lunar magic. It doesn't count." But I still turned. I sputtered in disbelief, ignoring the warning that flashed through Zion's gaze. "I became a wolf, and I know if I tap into that energy, I can do it again." "And look what that did to you," Zion snapped, motioning to my body. "You sustained injury beyond what any wolf could tolerate in a lunar state. About every muscle in your body was shredded, Epsilon. Do you not recognize how dangerous it is?" I opened my mouth to retort, but the male beat me to it. "Not to mention the instability. The emotional state is very unstable, Epsilon. For inexperienced users, it is hard for them to distinguish between friend and foe. You could have mauled your friends, as easily as you had those stranger wolf. My mouth fell shut. Though I wanted to deny his claims, I couldn't. Now that I thought about it, I had attacked the first wolf I'd seen. Who knows what would have happened if I hadn't seen that wolf first, or if I hadn't collapsed when I did. But something didn't add up. Lord Osriel said I have a power that could save this territory, I began, locking his gaze. He was talking about my emotional magic. How am I going to achieve that if I'm forbidden to use it? Zion sighed, shaking his head. You are not forbidden, Epsilon, you are just too inexperienced to use it as of yet. You must first learn to control your wolf with lunar magic before you try an emotional state. It didn't make much sense to me, but I knew arguing would get me nowhere, especially with a man like Zion. So, I forced my mouth shut and gave him a stiff nod. Looking something close to pleased, Zion stood, striding towards the door. I expect your recovery to be quick and efficient. You should be back on your feet within a couple of days. When you are, consult Lord Osriel. Below the screens, I saw him pause before the door, crimson pelter hanging just above the ground. He wishes to see you. Chapter 24. Zion was right. As he predicted, my recovery had been speedy, and within several days I had already been discharged from the infirmary. Having free rein of the court was a relief, especially since it provided an escape from my vexing thoughts. In the infirmary, with nothing but fluorescent lights and the smell of pharmacutiles for comfort, thoughts were my only company. I'd found myself thinking of Zion a lot, as well as Osriel's words. I still found it hard to believe such a brutish person, such as himself, could have been bullied. Hell, he seemed like the type to bite someone's head off the moment they said anything marginally disrespectful. Not to mention he was the second highest rank in the pack. It just didn't seem possible. Despite the distractions of the court, my thoughts continued to pester me long after I'd left the infirmary. Desperate for a better distraction, I'd gone to sort out my Omega friends. I hadn't seen much of them, aside from the times they'd visited my ward, and even then I'd been half asleep. I was soon wandering the inner courtyard, hoping to see any of them around. I knew the courtyard was popular among the youngsters, for whatever reason. Strangely enough, they weren't there, and even stranger were the looks that were thrown my way. They still reeked of hostility, for sure, but there was another element to them, something I hadn't noticed before, or rather had been lack thereof. Something was off, for sure, but I couldn't quite place my finger on it. Whenever I caught their glares, they would quickly look down or shuffle away in haste. Sometimes they refused to look at me at all, instead straining to keep their eyes the other way. Weirded out by this strange behavior, I was about to exit the courtyard when two people in forest green pelters approached me. They looked a little older than my companions, at least 17. They regarded me strangely. They paused a few feet before me, and for a few moments we stood in tense silence. Then, to my great surprise, they both bowed their heads. Thank you for saving our Saurus and Fratters. I stood there in shock. I wasn't quite sure what they were talking about, or why they were even talking to me, but before I had so much as an inch to open my mouth, the two had already scampered off into the bustle of the courtyard. I blinked. That was strange, for sure, but I didn't have much time to mull over the details before a familiar face peered out from behind one of the many arches. I stilled. The male stepped into the yard, and I had never seen the light capture anyone's perfection to such degree. His black hair gleamed like strands of onyx, the sun a golden liquid dancing along its surface. The light cast shadows down his hard-cut features, over his sharp eyebrows' perfect jawline. His azure eyes gleamed clear and bright, like blue waves of an eternal sea. His gaze caught me, snared me in their eternal beauty, their immortality, and for a moment I forgot I was existing. Kyra! He called, snapping me from my stupor. I blushed fiercely and looked away, wondering what the hell just happened. Hey, I stammered as he made his way over. People were watching us both with curiosity and skepticism. I found that to be a common theme whenever I was around Osriel. He paused a few steps before me, stealing my gaze once again. His midnight black pelter billowed in the wind, golden embroidery catching the light in mysterious ways. His black combat pants and slate-grey shirt matched his Stygian features, and something stirred in my gut as he smiled. "I hope you didn't forget about our private lesson, Kyra," he joked. My back straightened. "Of course not." I stammered. I hadn't forgotten about it, not the slightest. In fact, it had been one of my most recurring thoughts, second to the whole thing with Zion. Even so, I hadn't expected it to be so soon. Osriel chuckled, a coarse sound that rumbled out his throat. I fought the urge to blush again, though I didn't know if it was out of embarrassment or fluster. "Come, we'll go now if you'd like, at least while we still have the light." He offered me his arm, and for a few moments I gawked. It seemed too intimate to be taking the Alpha's arm, let alone touching him. However, noting the stares of those around me, I quickly buried my doubts and hooked my arm in his own. Osriel grinned. I quickly looked to the ground, desperate to hide the heat on my cheeks. I put it down to embarrassment, as many eyes followed us out the courtyard, into the great halls beyond. Chapter 25. The sun was well into the sky. White flossed clouds drifted across the clear blue, the sun's rays touching the lush grasses at our feet. The wind was gentle, bringing with it warm air from the east. I could smell the faint scent of wildflowers and old oak from the forest. Together, I and Osriel trekked towards the tree line on the other side of the field, weaving past the canvas tents and slate buildings. As we reached the start of the undergrowth, I tossed a glance over my shoulder, taking in the palace behind us. Its spires stretched high into the sky, windows reflecting the sunlight like gold gems amidst a silver band. "Has this been discovered by humans yet?" I asked, stepping over a thick tree root. "I mean, it's a huge castle in the middle of a forest, surely someone would have noticed it by now." Osriel gave me a half-smile. "I could see why you would think that, dear." "Kyra," I corrected with a smile. He chuckled. "Kyra. But there is an invisible barrier surrounding the whole forest." My eyes widened. "A barrier?" "Yes. It's part of the Wolven blessing, the same thing that wiped your parents' memories." I grimaced, and a dull ache formed in my chest. Noticing my distress, Osriel rushed to change the subject. "Anyway, just as the memory wipe keeps our existence secret, so does the barrier. I'm not quite sure how it works or what it does, but I've been told that if a human steps past the barrier, they will have the burning urge to turn back around." I pondered. I recalled my bright crockery days of childhood, where I and a couple of other kids would always venture into the woods. There always seemed to be some point that the kids demanded to turn back, that they felt something was off. I never felt it, though, but I would turn back anyways. Silence ensued, and I returned my gaze ahead. Great oaks loomed before us, their wizened bark telling stories of yesteryear. Wildflowers sprung up at my feet, an array of colors amidst the green mass of the grasses. The sound of songbirds rang in my ears, accompanying the array of smells that met my nostrils. It wasn't long before we reached a small clearing. Osriel came to a halt. "Here will do," he said, pushing past the line of undergrowth. I followed him, unsure as to what would happen next. Slowly, he turned towards me, eyes gleaming. "Today, Kyra, you will master the art of turning." My brows shot up. I barked a dry laugh. "I wouldn't put your money on that, Osriel, I'm hopeless." He waggled a finger at me, tutting. "You doubt yourself, Kyra. Besides, I will be helping you, not Zion, and don't worry, this won't include yelling in your ears." I stifled a chuckle. It felt wrong to be talking about Zion in such a manner, but I supposed Osriel was the alpha, so he could do it. Collecting myself, I folded my arms. How so? Simple. He chirped, cracking his knuckles. I'm going to amplify your susceptibility to the magic in the air. My eyes widened. Amplify? He nodded. You haven't been taught this yet, Kyra, but every wolf develops a special unique ability. There are one of 4 abilities one can develop: amplification, nullification, shifting and healing. My jaw dropped. So what am I? I asked, suddenly eager to know which wacky power I might holster. A laugh rumbled from the male's chest, it sounded like the coarse grind of coffee beans. My cheeks heated slightly. We do not know that yet, dear. That will come when you develop your skill. I sat back, nodding. Do you remember what I said about some wolves being specialists? He continued. I gave him a slow nod. Well, pack doctors such as Dr. Herschel have the healing ability. Though all wolves can heal themselves to some extent, they cannot heal others. Meanwhile, those with the healing ability can heal themselves and others at a great rate. I nodded. So how does an amplifier work? Osriel smiled. Well, us amplifiers work by amplifying magic and our affinity to it. While we can use it on ourselves to greaten our strengths, we can use it on others to heighten their magic as well. I nodded. Slowly, Osriel extended his hand. Let me show you, he whispered. I stared at his outstretched palm, hesitating. Something within me fluttered at the thought of holding his hand, even though I barely knew him. I quickly batted the feeling away. He's here to train you, I reminded myself. Not to walk you around on a romantic date. Even so, I couldn't help the little trill that sang through me the moment my hand connected with his. However, the feeling was short-lived as a sudden wave of power snaked up my arm, racing through my veins and slamming into me with the force of a train. Everything seemed clearer, and I could feel something in the air around me almost like a pulsing. My heart stopped. The buzz? I was feeling the buzz of lunar energy around me, the thing Zion had harped on about. I gawked towards Osriel, as though to check if this was real, and when he shot me a reassuring smile I grinned. What now? I asked, unable to keep the shocked quivers from my voice. Osriel chuckled. There's no need to be frightened of the lunar energy, Kyra. It is calling to you. I'm not scared, I breathed. I'm exhilarated. Osriel smiled, as though reading my mind. It's quite a lot to take in, especially when it's your first time sensing it. But once you've sensed it once, you'll know what to look for. I nodded. A small chuckle escaped me. Why didn't we do this earlier? Because, Osriel replied. Zion insisted on teaching you first. I didn't have much time to take in the magnitude of those words before he gripped my hand a little tighter, sending hot electricity through my body. Now, let's try to turn, shall we? I nodded. Osriel came closer to me, face inches from mine. My face heated. God, what is up with me today? I want you to close your eyes and focus on the energy, he purred. I want you to take it and claim it as yours. It is at your disposal. I nodded, closing my eyes. Sucking in a deep breath, I focused on the lunar energy around me, trying to draw it towards me. For a few moments, nothing happened. Then, I felt it coming closer, the buzz getting more and more intense as it clustered around me. I gasped, eyes snapping open. I lost my grip on the magic, the buzz dissipating in an instant. I quickly shot Osriel an apologetic look, but he only smiled. That's okay, dear. That's happened to the best of us. It's a bit intense at first. I nodded, closing my eyes again. This time, I didn't try to fight against it. Even when the buzz was on my skin, pattering along with it like little drummers, trying to push its way inside, I remained steadfast. Good, Osriel said. Now, draw it into you. I swallowed. I tried to bring it inside me, but it stayed suspended around me. I could feel it pushing to get in, demanding, but something was blocking it. It won't, I stammered. I can't make it go in. Osriel let go of my hand, and I felt the magic dissipate again. I was surprised to find I could still detect the buzz in the air around me, though albeit a bit weaker. He looked at me. You're blocking it, Kyra, you're stopping it from getting in. I swallowed. I'm not, you are, he corrected with a sad smile. Even if you're not doing it consciously, something in you is hesitating. What is it, Kyra? I opened my mouth, but realizing I had nothing to say, closed it instead. He was right. Deep down, I was holding back on something I couldn't let go of. A hope. The hope that I'm not actually a wolf-turning beast. The hope that one day I will wake up safe and sound in my bed, this having been a bad dream. The hope that I'm not in a palace with people who hate me. I swallowed. I knew it was hopeless, but I didn't want to accept it. I didn't want to accept this as my life now. I didn't want to live in this place. I didn't want to accept that the lives of hundreds of people were on my shoulders. I didn't want. Kyra? Osriel asked gently, snapping me from my thoughts. I scrubbed the back of my neck, suddenly anxious. Osriel, I'm sorry, was all I could say. I really want to achieve this, I really do. I want to save this court and save your people, and I want to prove that I'm worth something, but there's just so much going on in my head, and I can't keep track of it all, and… Kyra, he interrupted. Look at me. I did as he said. His blue eyes snared me in an instant, gleaming despite the sadness behind them. I stared, and for a moment I glimpsed who this man really was, a tired, wary leader. He gave me a sad smile. Do not think about the fate of the kingdom right now, he began. Whatever is holding you back, whether it's a thought or feeling, you must let it go. It is the only way you can progress. I swallowed, taking my eyes to the ground. He was right. If I wanted to progress, I would have to forget my thoughts and feelings, abandon my fruitless hope. But it was hard. So hard. That hope was the last single remnant of my old life, a life long dead, perhaps, but a life all the same. Kyra, Osriel whispered. I stared up at him again. His eyes gleamed like midnight candles, fueled with a strange emotion I couldn't quite decipher. It took me a moment. I was staring at the very real embodiment of hope. He wanted me to do it. He wanted to see me master this skill, as much as I wanted to master it myself. For him, I promised myself, closing my eyes. For him, I'll give up my hope. Just this once. I owe it. Tentatively, I grabbed his hand. I called the magic towards me, ignoring the cold stir of doubt in my gut. The energy reached my frame, drumming along my skin, desperate to get in. Then, I let go of everything, the hope of an old life, my reluctance to live in the southern court, the fears that had kept me grounded since day one. A weight was lifted off of me at that moment, and I could breathe again. The magic rushed into me, and at that moment I was electrified. It was thrumming in my bones, pulsing in my heart and sparking in my blood. I felt invincible, powerful, like nothing in the world could stop me. Now, Kyra, Osriel muttered. I realized his hand wasn't on mine anymore. Turn. I walked out the tree line with my head held high. Osriel was trailing not a few steps behind me, grinning like an idiot. Before me, I could see the groups of people clustered around several crimson pelters. My eyes honed in on one in particular, upon the auburn hair of its wearer, strands billowing in the wind like streaks of fire. Zion! Osriel called. The man whirled, his student's eyes landing on us. Osriel's grin widened. I think Kyra has something she wants to show you. I continued walking forward, staring down the man before me. His green eyes narrowed. I started to close my eyes, feeling the buzz of lunar energy around me. I let it in, loving its warm flow through my veins, the way it thrummed in my bones. Turn. My bones clicked in and out of place, muscles stretching and contracting to accommodate the change. My body ached, but it was nothing. No amount of pain would ruin this moment, not now. I opened my eyes. I stood tall on all fours, my black fur billowing in the wind. I loved the way the grass licked my pads, the way the wind brushed against my hot skin. I glanced towards the others, who were staring at me with open shock. Zion wasn't, though. In fact, he was grinning. Good, the male called. Now, we can begin. Chapter 26. The muffled melody of songbirds rang in my ears. Sunlight streamed through the gossamer curtains, glistening upon the polished floor. It was cold despite the sun already being a ways above the horizon. Winter was on the way, and with it came those awful chills. I'd had the false impression that living in a fantasy forest would somehow spare me to the cruel change in seasons, but that couldn't be further from the truth. Even so, the cold couldn't dampen my spirit. I leaped out of bed, barring towards the ensuite with a spring in my step. Today held a milestone for me. Today, I would be permitted to duel with the others. After countless hours spent with Zion, he'd finally decided was ready to take the next big step in werewolf training the fighting. I tumbled into the bathroom. But of course, this was Zion. I was still required to do one private lesson to ensure that I was ready, which would mean skipping breakfast. That didn't matter much to me, though. The excitement bubbling in my chest was enough to mask the hunger. I smirked, palming the brush on the vanity. It was odd to think that no more than a month ago, Zion and I had been at each other's throats. Sure, at times we still were, and he still had that vexing aspect to him, but something had improved, a feat I didn't think was possible. It seemed we'd learned to tolerate each other a bit more, and I wouldn't go so far as to call it friendship, but it was certainly an improvement to what we once were. I thought back. Thankfully, nothing major in terms of attacks had happened over the past month. It seems they'd dialed down on the attacks ever since they landed that big blow on us. I'd later learned that the leader of that attack had been the Western Court, and the leader the Western Alpha, the same one who had bitten me. I frowned. I wanted to know more about him. All I knew were his looks, red eyes and matted grey fur. Other than that, I was left with more questions than I had answers. I wanted to know why he'd bitten me and, well, why he'd bitten me. And why didn't he try to take me to his court? Surely I would have been just as worthy an asset there as I was here, right? Pushing the thoughts out of my head, I spared a glance in the mirror. Not only had my werewolf abilities improved, but so had my looks. I looked so much better. Hell, I had looks that would put Jane to shame. My hair had volume, the black strands catching the light in strange ways. My skin looked better, I had next to no acne, and it almost looked to be glowing. And my eyes. God, I never thought they could look so mesmerizing. The dull slate gray had become a beautiful deep storm cloud, energy roiling within silver flecks rimming my iris, a feature I had failed to notice before. They contained that ethereal glow I had envied others for. Raina had told me it was the lunar magic working wonders on my body. Initially, I'd called her bluff, insisting it was part of some strange placebo. However, I was soon forced to reconsider my beliefs when I noticed the shift in temperament from the others. I'd noticed more heads turning my way, and not in hostility. I also hadn't heard the ugly insult in a while. I set down my brush. In fact, I hadn't heard any insults in a while. People still glared at me and whispered behind my back, but they weren't so upfront about it. Well, with the exception of the thetas, they antagonized me as badly as they always had. Funnily enough, many of the Omegas had come to like me. Maybe it was because I sat at their table every now and again, or that I had saved a few of their ranks. Even so, it was a privilege I wouldn't take for granted. A knock sounded at my door. Raina. Quickly, I brushed my teeth and washed up, excited to rave on about the events of today. Raina and I had become quite close, well, as close as two could become over such a small period. She didn't need to escort me anymore, for I knew my way around the palace, but I enjoyed her company anyways. Padding across the polished floors, I opened the door. There, standing at my frame, was Raina. Her hair had been done up in a messy bun, pins holding down the voluminous locks that begged to spring out. Her emerald eyes glimmered as they met mine, a warm smile upon her face. "Kyra," she greeted, stepping aside so I could get through. "How was your sleep?" "It was good," I drew out the last syllable, eyeing her as we walked down the hallways. A smirk passed her face. "Were you dreaming about Osriel?" My heart stuttered, but I quickly recovered with a dry laugh. "God, no, I haven't seen that man in well over a month. Hell, I've probably forgotten what he looks like now." Raina shook her head with a chuckle. "Well, you are right, he has been gone a while. But I guess it's what to expect as a leader errand after errand. I think it's safe to say it's not an easy life." I nodded with a smile, but I couldn't help the painful twist in my stomach. Osriel and I hadn't spoken much since our last time together. We would exchange brief greetings in passing, but that was about it. With me settling in, and Zion taking care of me, I assumed it was time for him to resume his usual life. I frowned. I still missed him, though. Within minutes we'd made our way into the courtyard. Once we were within the lobby, I came to an abrupt halt. Raina gave me a questioning look. "I forgot to mention," I stammered, cursing myself. I'd spent so much time thinking about Osriel, I'd forgotten to tell her about my lesson. "I'm having a private session with Lord Zion, I'll have to forego breakfast." For a moment, disappointment flashed across Raina's face, but she quickly masked it with a smile. "Tell Susie and Ulrich I said hi, all right," I called, starting to make my way down the right hall. "Oh, and tell Olkan that he can have his book back. I've read it already." Raina nodded, and within moments she was lost in the crowd filtering into the dining room. I broke into a quick pace as I made my way down the vast halls, pleased to find they were mostly empty. After much walking, I finally happened upon the large archway that led outside. Without another thought, I stepped outside. The sky was clear blue, white flossed clouds dragged along its canvas by the gentle, cool winds. Perspiration sparkled upon the soft grasses, and I shivered as my soles made contact with the icy wet. People strode in and out of the canvas tents, yelling each other around as they prepared for expeditions into the forest. And there, standing in the middle of it all, stood Zion. He shot me a grin. "Ah, Epsilon, about time." I chuckled, allowing myself a moment to revere in the dewy lick of grass over my soles. It wasn't as cold now. "You're looking awfully happy today, Zion." "Lord Zion," he corrected, a slight edge to his tone. A devious grin tugged at his lips. "And yes, I must admit I'm quite looking forward to seeing you fight." Chapter 27. He strode towards me, green eyes narrowing. "You know the drill, Epsilon, draw in the magic." I nodded, closing my eyes. I sensed the magic all around me, thrumming in the air. I beckoned it towards me, commanding it. Once it was drummed against my skin, I allowed it to leach in, careful not to let it bombard me. The magic seeped through my pores, thundering through my blood, and as much as I wanted to let it all in, I had to control the flow. This was perhaps one of the most technical skills to master. It was very difficult to draw in lunar magic without giving in to the urge to turn. Zion had started teaching me how to master it right after I had the turning down. After many arguments and dozens more failed attempts, I'd finally mastered it. But that didn't mean it was easy. I jolted as a mass of magic slammed into me, the urge to turn into a wolf ripping the air from my chest in a loud gasp. "Regain control, Epsilon," came Zion's steady voice. "You control the magic, it does not control you." I nodded, calming the racing beat of my heart. I waited until warm energy thrummed through my veins, my mind clearing of any thoughts and urges that beckoned for me to become wolf. Then, I opened my eyes. Zion was staring at me with raised brows. "Ah, would you look at that," he remarked. I shook slightly at the energy that tore through me, but Zion didn't seem to notice. He shot me a cynical half-smile. "You want to be able to do that in today's duel, though if you revert to human state and get clobbered, well, that's on you." I rolled my golden eyes. I'd only learned a few days ago what my werewolf eye color was: bright gold with electric yellow flecks. Zion had told me he'd never seen anything like it, but, if I was honest, they just looked like a brighter version of his. "I think I can handle myself, Lord Zion," I drawled, smirking as he frowned at the emphasis. "Besides, my control's been fine thus far, nothing can go wrong now." "You say that," he muttered, slightly disgruntled. He glanced behind me, nodding towards the archway. "The other theaters will be here soon, Epsilon. I have paired you with someone who I believe will put that ego back in check." "What ego?" I snapped back. Zion smirked. I folded my arms. "I'm sorry, Lord Zion, but I believe you have a much larger ego than me." He barked a laugh. "Because I've earned this ego, Epsilon. You must remember your place in the pack. You're a theta, I'm a beta. Very different statuses. Very different egos." I sighed, rolling my eyes. "Yeah, that's all well and good until your head can't fit through the door." He scowled, eyes clouding with confusion. I smirked when realization lit up his features, quickly followed by that of usual annoyance. "Don't get too cocky, Epsilon," he warned. "Though you have shown improvement, you are still a ways away from where we need you to be. Time's ticking, and you can't be wasting that precious time dawdling." I rolled my eyes despite the anxiety that surged at his remark. He was right, the court hadn't been attacked in a month, so who knew what was coming next? Something big, I'd wager, but would I be ready? I looked up towards the sun, which was further into the sky now. "Time's ticking," I reminded myself. "And you're in a race against it." "Anyways, Lord Zion," I started, desperate to change the subject. "Who am I dueling with today?" I sensed his smirk rather than seeing it, dread pooling in my gut before he even had an inch to speak. "Your partner will be Azure." My eyes snapped open. I gasped as I lost control of the magic, its essence spilling out every inch of me. I whirled to Zion, who was, in fact, smirking. "What?" "I figured she'd be good for you," he said with raised brows. "She's one of the best in the class. I'd say she's a worthy opponent." I opened and closed my mouth. Azure had hated me from the moment I'd set foot in this court. I knew she wanted me dead the moment her pretty blue eyes battered towards me. If everyone else had warmed up to me, then she was the glaring exception. She wasted no opportunities to hedge a snide remark, or knock me over by accident. I swallowed. And now she would be allowed to fight me. I swayed on my feet. "You look pale, Epsilon," Zion drawled with a smirk. "Something wrong?" I shook my head, shooting him a glare. "No," I ground out. "Prick." He simply gave me that annoying half-smile. Then, he nodded towards the archway. "Look, a few of them are coming now." I whirled, my heartbeat rising to my throat. I watched as people spilled out the archway, their blue pelters billowing in the wind as they chatted amongst each other. My eyes darted wildly about them, searching for that damned face. It wasn't long before I found her, and with chilling realization, I recognized that she had found me first. I swallowed, my eyes locked helplessly upon hers, a devious grin passing her features. My head whipped towards Zion. I shot him my meanest glare, but that damned smirk of his did not waver. At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to slap him. Prick. I thought again. Chapter 28. I swallowed, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. Azure was strolling towards us, a few other people clustering in her wake. I would call them her cronies, but she never seemed to acknowledge them at all. Instead, she stared ahead, where she caught sight of me. She shot me a sneer. That wasn't unusual, and her spiteful looks usually didn't bother me. But with the information I'd just received, it came to no surprise that her glare lodged spears of dread into my stomach. The blonde was skilled. I'd seen her in her wolf form, a white wolf with bright blue eyes with a menacing set of teeth to match. I'd seen her tear into her peers without mercy. I could only imagine what she would do to me. I stood idly by as more and more people arrived, forming the usual clusters. I joined the group of other people that looked about my age, painfully reminded of the time I was forced to train with the pups. I pushed the memory out of my head. Several people in crimson pelters strolled out the archways, claiming their groups. Zion took ours, turning to face us as his auburn hair gleamed in the wind, a menacing twinkle in his eye as he grinned. Today, everyone, we will be having our monthly duel. Pups, you will stand by and observe. As for the rest of you, I have paired you up with parters, who you will only find out when it comes to your turn. I didn't miss the amused look he shot my way. I ground my teeth. Insufferable. I missed mention too that we have a special guest who will be watching us today. I frowned, as did many others. Who would want to see something like this? Zion nodded behind us. Alpha Osriel, welcome. The words were like a kick to the stomach. I whirled, almost knocked off balance by my eagerness. Others turned too, eyes wide as they stared at one figure in particular. I let out a shuddering breath. He looked ethereal. His jet-black hair gleamed in the sunlight, strands cut straight from a stone of onyx. His blue eyes twinkled as he regarded us, matching the glow of his features. I found myself staring at his lips as they turned upwards, his perfect jawline as it shifted to accommodate his smile. It wasn't until Zion spoke again that I realized I'd been staring. Lord Osriel will be observing you guys today, he informed. I turned to look at him for the briefest OG moments, catching the admiration sparkling in his eyes as he regarded his leader. I glanced back towards Osriel, and for a fleeting moment our eyes meet. Electricity lashed through me. My cheeks flamed. I don't know why, but I had to look away. So please, everyone, perform your best. Osriel chuckled a coarse sound, like the grounding of warm coffee beans. I didn't miss the absolute adoration that formed in the other girls' eyes, the way they swooned. Do not put so much pressure on them, Zion. He turned towards us, addressing us directly, please, pay no mind to my prescience. I am simply an observer, not your judge. A small silence settled over the grounds. Zion clasped his hands together, earning our attention again. Right. I will call out the names of the sparring partners. Everyone, please gather around the circle. Slowly, each of us walked towards the circle that had been etched into the ground, a wonky makeshift ring. It wasn't much, just dirt that had been upturned by a stick, but it was something. People were talking in excited voices, many of the girls stealing glances at Osriel as he walked towards his beater. I lingered at the back of the circle, eager to be out of the general line of sight. Thankfully, the fighting began almost instantly, so I didn't have to worry about being the center of attention for once. Belle and Matthias. Zion called. A female with brown hair and a red boy stepped out from the crowd. You will be the first to duel. Please, get into position. The two nodded, striding onto either side of the ring. All went silent as the two stood still, their eyes glowing brighter as they drew in their lunar magic. They remained in their human form, frames shaking slightly. On your mark. Zion called. The two resumed battle stances. Fight. Within seconds, the two were engaged in combat. Everyone watched on as the girl sent a powerful punch to the side of the boy's head, to which he answered with blow to the stomach. The girl doubled over as if in deep pain. I resisted the urge to rush over to her and check if she was okay, reminding myself these people were werewolves, magical beings with the ability to speed heal. Then again, I wasn't used to seeing a girl getting beaten by a boy. I saw the boy's guard relax, obviously thinking he had the upper hand. I thought he did too, until the girl shot up and swept her leg out, hitting the boy's shin with a loud crack. She didn't look hurt at all, and it took me a moment to realize she'd been faking the pain. Smart, I thought as the boy fell to the floor with a yelp. It came to no surprise when he stuck his hand out, signaling his surrender. He looked slightly embarrassed, but I guess it made sense he'd made the mistake of letting his guard down, all because he'd been confident his blow had stung. A little too confident, I mused to myself. The girl glowed with triumph. I was about to applaud along with the others when I noticed something blazing in my peripheral. I turned, catching Azure's gaze. She was staring at me, the sinister smile on her lips growing as my eyes met hers. I looked away. I wondered if she knew I was her partner. I quickly dismissed the thought. No, that was impossible. Right? I instinctively looked towards Zion, who was staring disapprovingly at Matthias. Or maybe it isn't, I thought bitterly. The two walked off the arena, and I didn't miss the limp in the boy's step. I tried to calm my racing heart, hating the anticipation that knotted my gut. It's all right, I reminded myself. Your duel won't be for a while. Next up. Zion called, green eyes locking on mine. My heart sunk as the smallest smirk tugged at his lips. Azure and Kyra. I felt myself go pale. I resisted the urge to look at Azure, who of which was grinning at me in my peripheral. Others were looking at me too, the tension in the air so thick one could cut it with a knife. I glimpsed Osriel's bewildered expression, and in that moment he leaned over to say something to Zion. The auburn-haired man waved him off, instead beckoning us forward. I swallowed. Slowly, I weaved my way through the crowd, aware of the ice-blonde girl doing the same somewhere off to my left. I tried to calm my breathing as I found my spot on the ring. I closed my eyes and sucked in a breath, readying myself mentally as I turned towards my opponent. Not to my surprise, she was smirking at me, no doubt finding my nervous reaction amusing. Fight. Chapter 29. Decided to post this part early because I felt mean for leaving that cliffhanger. Happy New Year's everyone. Azure wasted no time. In a flash of ice blonde, the woman arrived at my side, the lament of her surprise earning me a nasty blow to the side. I rolled away how Zion had told me, biting the inside of my cheek as an ache bloomed at my ribs. Zion had warned me that werewolf dueling was often harsh and bone-splintering, and in that moment I didn't doubt him for a second. A few people cheered in the crowd, fueling the urgeness in Azure's eyes as she made her way towards me again. I composed myself, taking a deep breath. I resumed the stance Zion had taught me, placing my arms where I thought Azure would try hit next. Sure enough, she went straight for my head, her blow intercepted by my wrist. I ignored the pain that bloomed there, instead focusing on forcing magic down my leg as I swung it out, sweeping her feet from under her. Azure's blue eyes widened in surprise as she was forced backwards, stumbling to regain her footing. I went on the offense, scanning her body for any place to strike. If I'd learned anything from my boxing days as a kid, the best place to punch someone was where they least wanted to be hit. In Azure's case, it was the bandage on her arm, which would have been concealing a wound from a prior fight. She quickly covered her face with her elbows, anticipating a blow to the head. Such assumption cost her greatly. Many eyes widened, particularly Zion's, as I aimed for the bandage on her shoulder. I knew I was successful when the girl let out a loud yelp, scuttling back and cradling her arm. For a fleeting moment, I spared a glance towards Zion. He was grinning. And so was Osriel. Something about the latter fueled me with renewed vigor. I turned back to Azure. Her gaze had followed mine, jealousy passing over her features, as she put two and two together. Her face contorted into a snarl. Within moments, Azure was running towards me again, and I braced my arms against my head. "You mean nothing to them, Epsilon," she whispered, low enough so not even the werewolves beside us could hear. I faltered, and the girl did not waste the opportunity. Her fist met my chin, forcing my head to snap back. I caught Zion's concerned glance, obviously wondering what had gone wrong in just the span of a few seconds. I quickly righted myself, rolling to the side to dodge a kick that probably would have winded me. I struggled to my feet as the world spun around me, the only stillness being Azure's glowing eyes. I readied myself for another attack when Azure swept up to my right. "Useless," she hissed, punching my chest. I gasped as the wind was forced from my lungs, the sound of the crowd's cheers distorted in my ears. I staggered back, trying to regain my stance. Azure simply gazed at me with a sickly sweet smile, and between that and the blue eyes that glittered with cruelty, I couldn't help the dread that formed in my gut. I had almost recovered my stance when Azure opened her mouth again. "You know, Epsilon," she began, stalking towards me with an evil smirk. She hadn't bothered to whisper this time, meaning everyone could hear. "You don't belong here. Just because you managed to charm the alpha and beta into letting you stay, doesn't mean we accept you." My heart dropped. Osriel looked aghast, and Zion looked nothing short of furious. "Azure," he yelled. "Do not provoke your opponent whilst in the ring." Azure didn't so much as spare him a glance, for her gaze was locked on me. Something roiled within me, and I felt the lunar magic quaking in response, almost in fear. I didn't have much time to mull over it, though, before the girl opened her mouth to speak again. "You know, maybe it's a good thing your parents don't remember you. Who would want to call a failure like yourself a daughter, anyway?" The mucus in my neck tightened. I quaked as a white-hot energy rumbled through me, extinguishing the cool touch of lunar energy, and feeding a fire I hadn't realized was building in my gut. "Azure," Osriel called, stalking towards the ring. "This is your last warning." Had the circumstances been different, I may have been surprised to hear Osriel yelling, even afraid. But in that moment I was too busy trying to maintain my control to care, the control that had turned to liquid in my palms, and was slipping further through my fingers with every second pass. Azure smiled at me. She was standing over me now. "I'm glad you're nothing more than dead to them." Time slowed. Several things happened at once. Azure's eyes widened as Osriel unleashed his agetto on her, rooting her to the spot. A red-hot energy pumped through me, my vision turning a purple tint. As I stared at Azure, my bones clicked and my muscles twinged. But over my rage, the pain of my turning was nothing more than a small ache at the back of my mind, a minor hindrance. And then everything was crystal clear. That enhanced clarity that I had come to love washed over me, calming me for the briefest of moments, like the calm before the storm. But storms don't stay calm forever, and before knew it my mind was a mess of turbulent winds and violent rains, and I had only one desire in me. Revenge. Faster than lightning, I stood, grabbing Azure's throat with a furred hand. The sun caught my dark fur in strange ways, its indigo tint gleaming as I lifted Azure off the ground as easily as one would breathe air. She clawed at my hands, her eyes dimming as panic and desperation alike extinguished her magic. Everyone was frozen in my peripheral. Zion looked aghast, and Osriel just stared in disbelief. In a lightning-fast motion, I tossed Azure across the ground like a ragdoll. I went on all fours and ran towards her. In her loss of lunar control, she herself had turned into a wolf, scrambling to get away. She was fast. But I was faster. I stabbed her between the shoulder blades with my blackened claws, throwing her on her back. Blood matted her snow-white coat, blue eyes wide with fear as I roared. I balled my third hand into a fist, smashing it right into her chest. She screeched as bones cracked asunder my blow. She tried to scramble from under my reach, but her effort was futile. I simply dragged her back, sending another hard blow to the head. Her head went back, eyes clouding as though in a daze. I was about to send another blow when I was pulled off her. I whirled. There stood a werewolf with red and grey fur, his gold eyes determined and angry. Zion! He snarled at me in challenge, readying himself to pounce. The rational part of me would know this was a stupid idea, that he was not the one I wanted revenge on. But there was no rational part of me, only emotion and power, and that was a dangerous combo. So, I charged from him. In my rush to get to him, the male had managed to sink his teeth into my neck. I barely felt the pain, it was nothing more than a pinprick. He remained there for a few moments, as though expecting something to happen, but getting impatient I knocked him off me. He yelped as I landed a blow to his side. He staggered back with a look between bewilderment and fear. He'd obviously tried something on me, and it hadn't worked. The thought only angered me more, and I was about to go after him when another furry figure entered my peripheral. I whirled. This wolf had jet black fur, his frame much more muscular and bigger than the others. His azure eyes glowed brighter than a blue moon as they stared into mine. Even amidst the boiling in my blood, I felt a strange electricity spreading through me at the contact. I didn't have much time to regain my focus as he jumped atop me, forcing me on my back. Before I could so much as struggle, he locked me in his gaze, a singular word forming at his mouth. Surrender. The energy that had been thundering throughout my body dissipated in an instant, turning to dust on the wind. I struggled and howled as I was painfully reverted to human form, except this time with no the adrenaline to mask the pain. The last thing I remembered was the wolf covering me with his black pelter before the world faded into darkness. Chapter 30. Everything was bright, too bright. I winced as the white light seared my retinas, blinding me. I gagged as the stench of disinfectants and metals assaulted my senses, and I cursed my werewolf nose. Thankfully the place wherever it was silent. I took a few moments for my eyes to adjust. It was then I realized that I was in the infirmary, with a wafer-thin mattress at my ass, and white screens shielding either side of me. Unaware of my surroundings, I didn't even know there was another person in the room until a voice growled out from beside me. What in God-loving heavens was that? I whirled, my eyes widening as they fell upon the looming figure of Zion. He was sitting on the black chair to my side, his arms folded across his broad chest. His green eyes narrowed as they regarded me, a permanent scowl creasing his forehead. I blinked, trying to recall how I'd wound up here, and why Zion was so mad at me. It took me a moment to remember what had happened between me and Azure. I noticed the small bandage on Zion's arm, and guilt filled me as I realized that must have been where I'd struck him in the crossfire. I hung my head. Some girl says a few words and you snap. He continued, snarling. Do you really have that little control over yourself? I stilled, mostly because I knew what he was saying was right. Silence ensued, the tension in the air so thick one could cut it with a knife. In a fluid motion, Zion stood, his shoulder-length hair fluttering with the motion. I'm trying, Epsilon, I really am. He started to pace around my bed. I tensed. He stopped at the foot, staring at me. I had never seen such darkness in someone's eyes, let alone his. And do you know why I tried so hard, Epsilon? I said nothing. Zion stared at me, waiting for an answer, and when I didn't respond, he continued, I tried because, once upon a time, I was in your shoes. I blinked, recalling the conversation I'd had with Osriel. There was a time when the whole pack hated me, he continued sharply. Once a time where I was not welcome an inch near the doormat, where my supposed peers had thought me better off dead. I shivered. Those words had a ring of familiarity to them. No one was there for me, Epsilon, not even a pack trainer. He snapped, barely contained anger to his tone. Though much of his rage was directed at me, I could tell he was angry at something else, too, something beyond my understanding. I had to train myself. I had to rise above all those who hated me. And now look at them, they are at my feet. He turned to me, then, eyes holding mine. I know how it feels to be alienated, Epsilon. It was why I was so hard on you. I wanted you to fit in as best as possible, and it worked for a while, didn't it? He hissed the last part before turning away on his heels. There was a definite bitterness to his tone, but there was something else there, too. Disappointment. My heart twisted with the realization. And now you've ruined it. If you weren't alienated before, you sure are now, and you know what? He turned back to me, sneering. If you don't even have it in you to help yourself, then I sure as hell don't know how I'm supposed to help you. He whirled, storming towards the door. I flinched as he wrenched it open with commendable force, sparing me not a glance, as he rushed out in a flutter of crimson before slamming it shut behind him. In the wake of his wrath, I was left with only the silence of my thoughts. And the regret. I swallowed. Our relationship, no matter how small or fragile it was, had been ruined. I'd ruined it, all because I had failed to control myself. I'd let him down. I hung my head. And to think all this time I thought Zion was the jerk. I thought he had it out for me solely because he hated me, and for a while, I believed that to be true. I looked again towards the door, recalling how upset he'd looked. But maybe I was the villain here. The revelation shot another wave of mental pain through me, and I couldn't help the traitorous tear that carved its way down my cheek. Stupid Kyra, I chastised myself, glaring at the foredrip that had been wedged into my arm. Stupid Kyra. Chapter 31. I'd been left alone for a few hours. After many minutes of craning my neck to see around the screens, I'd finally concluded I was the only one in the ward. For a while, I enjoyed the company of the silence. It was better than Zion's yelling, anyway. Of course, my reverie couldn't last forever. The door to the infirmary had swung open, the graceful footfalls telling me who it was even before I saw his face peer around the white screens. My heart did a flip-flop. Osriel. His hair was dark as ever, eyes bright despite the bags under them. He looked tired, exhausted, even. I don't know why, but just the sight of him riddled me with guilt. Mind if I sit here? He asked, motioning towards the chair. I rushed a nod, sitting up in my bed to give him more attention. This was the first time Osriel and I had been alone in almost a month, so it came to no surprise that my heart was racing. With a content smile, Osriel pulled up the chair and sat. He stared at his lap, and at that moment I could almost envision the weights on his shoulders. They were curved inwards, causing his entire posture to slump. His mouth curved into a small frown as I watched him, waiting for something to happen. Moments passed, but they traveled like years. Finally, he spoke. Please do not be so hard on yourself, Kyra. Zion and I should have stepped in earlier, and I know he won't admit it, but this is our fault if anything. I blinked. This wasn't the tongue-lashing I had anticipated. He looked up at me amidst my silence, and I quickly racked my head for a response. No, Osriel, it's my fault, I stammered, lowering my head. My eyes stung as I recalled Zion's words. I let both you and Lord Zion down. It was stupid of me to be so reactive. The male shook his head. No, don't apologize, Kyra. I should have used my agetto on Azure the moment she stood out of line. I blinked. I'd almost forgotten how Azure had clammed up moments before my attack. I'd initially thought she'd froze up at the sight of my wrath, but thinking back on it now, only something like an Agetto could inflict that degree of paralyzing fear. Osriel was staring intently, and it took me a moment to realize he was waiting for an answer. I shook my head again. It's all right, you couldn't have known. But I should have known, Kyra, he cut in. I should have known. I'm the leader, I'm responsible for everything. I opened my mouth, waiting for a rebuttal to form, but when nothing came I shut my mouth and stared into my lap. Tense silence consumed us again. A few Omegas came by to say goodbye, he said softly. Your friends, I believe. I frowned. To say goodbye. Osriel gnawed on his bottom lip, worry flashing through his gaze. My stomach dropped. Something was wrong. They are leaving the court, Kyra. They departed a few hours ago to join one of the outposts. My stomach lurched, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. The outposts? I repeated in disbelief. You mean, the first line of defense in the territory? The first places to get overrun? Osriel gave me a grave nod. I sputtered, but why? Why would you put them there when they could be safe here? Because they are needed there, Kyra. They are protecting the territory. My stomach dropped. Are you mad? They are not ready to fight. I yelled. Susie can't turn, and Ulrich has permanent damage to his hamstring. How would they defend themselves? I was on the verge of tears, but Osriel's expression was stone. They are not expected to fight, Kyra, that's the theater's job. They just do whatever tasks are assigned to them, very similar to if they were still at the court. Then why do they need to be there? I thundered. To wipe the theater's asses. Do their laundry. Piss off. Kyra, Osriel warned. They are needed for maintenance. Outposts need as much maintenance as the court does. They simply could not run off soldiers alone, they need Omegas who know how to fix stuff and keep everything in order. And what if the outpost gets overrun? I cut in. What then? It won't, Kyra, Osriel assured. The theaters are strong. They'll protect the Omegas with their lives. Bullshit. I snapped. Osriel looked about as taken aback by the harshness of my words as I was, but the fear for my friends overrun any bit of humility. You said yourself that the outposts are the first places to get overrun by enemy wolves. Besides, I've heard what the theaters say about the Omegas. They'll turn tail the moment anything gets bad. That's not true. It is. I snapped. I was angry, so angry that tears stung my eyes. But more than that, I was hurting. You never even bothered to see me. I quivered in a low voice, surprising myself for bringing this up mid-argument. Then again, it had been weighing on my mind a lot, and only now did I have the courage to say it. My gaze snapped towards him, a sudden fire blooming in my chest. You knew how everyone was treating me, and yet you never bothered to check up on me, not once. Do you even care? He sat in stunned silence for a few moments. Kyra, he began. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Osriel? I quipped back, fighting the tears in my eyes. You wax lyrical about how much you love your pack, and how you want everyone to be happy, and yet when I need you, you're not there. For God's sake, I'm going to be the one saving this territory because you're sorry as can't. At least give me the time of day, will you? I didn't know what I was saying. At that point, I was just yelling nonsense. It's not that easy, Kyra, he muttered, an edge to his voice. I have errands to run. I have a territory to protect. There are 3 enemy territories picking away at this territory like flesh from bone, and God forbid I be in less than 5 places at once. Oh yeah, it must be so hard to run the territory when you have teenagers sitting around at outposts waiting to die for you, I mocked. For the first time in a while, anger flashed through his azure eyes, reminding me of a turbulent sea. It goes beyond that. You should know this, Kyra, he said in a low voice. There are tensions on the horizon. This war has escalated far beyond our control, and if we don't do something soon, what war? I snapped back. A competition for who's the laziest leader. I don't know much about the other alphas, but I'd wager you'd win that. Kyra, he began and, as though catching himself last minute, fell silent. I narrowed my eyes. He was withholding information from me, and I was determined to find out what. Do you want me to go to those outposts too, my dear lord? I drawled, my sweet voice dripping with venom. Maybe I can even die for you if you'd please. Oh? Better yet, my friends, and I will hold hands and sing about how amazing of a leader you are whilst we are being torn limb from limb. Now wouldn't that be fun? You're causing these tensions, Kyra, don't you get it? He snapped. The tone of his voice stung me before the words even had a chance to register in my head. You're an Epsilon. The other territories want you, and I'm trying to prevent you from getting abducted and abused. And while, yes, you have a power that could save us all, it's no good when it can't even be used yet. I fell silent, his words piercing my heart like daggers. Osriel glowered at me, and all that anger I holstered moments ago melted into cold goo in my stomach. I had gone from wanting to punch him to wanting to sink into my mattress and disappear. His being angry at me melted away any confidence I had. And do you have any idea what they'll do to you? He continued coldly. They'll put you in chains, lock you behind bars, and use you as a slave. I'm not abandoning you, Kyra, I'm trying to protect you. More wolves than ever before are being assigned to outposts because of you, and so far it is not paying off. The words hit me like a hammer to the head, and for a moment the world seemed to tilt. I fell silent, then. I had no words to say, none other than the tears that carved down my cheeks. I watched Osriel's expression change, going from anger to regret to sorrow. Kyra, he began, reaching out to touch me. I didn't mean it. I recoiled from his touch, and hurt flashed through his gaze. Good? For many minutes, we sat in silence, bathing in the wake of our own wraths. I didn't know how to feel, but for every moment I thought over Osriel's words, the more spiteful I felt. I didn't care if I was being unreasonable. I didn't care that I was being bitter. All I knew was that I was angry. The thought that my presence in itself was putting the territory in jeopardy really hurt me, even when I was trying my best to save it. Why would he even divulge something so hurtful? He may as well have said his job would be easier if I were dead. I felt hurt, and part of my pride had been wounded. I leveled my gaze with him, trying to muster the look of indifference. If he was so eager to hurt me, then I had no qualms in returning the favor. I don't know who your predecessor was, I started quietly. But I do know he wouldn't be proud. Not at all, I didn't get to finish my question. In one lightning-fast motion, Osriel stood, whirling on his heel. He stormed across the infirmary, with his black pelter billowing behind him, a deadly aura surrounding him. I regretted everything that had ever left my mouth when he opened the door, slamming it hard shut behind him. If you enjoy Kyra's story, don't forget to subscribe, more excitement is coming.